So in order to increase our ability to have horizontal hip extension to get good DKE, we want to start to really learn and pattern how to move through our hips. So a lot of times when you hear me use the words coil or corkscrew, what we're talking about is understanding that our back hip and our front hip are always doing opposite things. And in order to move to locomote forward, we're going to never have to worry about getting vertical hip extension or getting vertical height or going up if we move through our hip sockets. And so what I mean by that is when you see me in this position, I'm red zone to red zone, I'm ready to accelerate this leg, and it's the same thing in our stance, okay? What you'll notice is I push red zone to red zone. So I'm not necessarily trying to drive straight. I'm trying to transfer force from this hip to this hip. And so what that looks like for me and what we've tested on force plates and what we've shown on force plates, what I've shown is that I'm able to move almost 200 newtons of force equally from my back foot to my front foot. So what that would mean is that from this position, I go from balance to being able to push the same amount of force that I start with. So if I have 300 newtons of force in this foot and I have 500 in this foot, I should be able, if I push and I move to 100, this should be 700 because I'm moving. That is the momentum and that is the true weight shift that we're looking for when we're trying to accelerate. And so what I'm doing in this position is the reason this hip is internally rotated is because it puts energy into this externally rotated hip. And then when I drive out, I end up in that straight line. Because the straight line is not happening because of linear motion, it's because I'm turning through and spiraling through my hip sockets that I end up straight. It's the same thing we talk about with rifling. Or bullet spin. When we put the screws, the rifling in a barrel of a gun, it allows us to spin and go straighter and truer because of the spin on the bullet. That's why it's called bullet spin. How do I make a straight line faster? I spin it. How do I make it tighter? I spin it tighter. That's how I increase velocity and speed in a rotational sport, in a rotational movement, which running, sprinting, throwing, hitting, all of those things are. And the tighter I rotate, the more acceleration and more velocity I'm going to have. So when we talk about the term, when you hear me talk about corkscrewing, all those things, this is the concept and principle that we're working through. It doesn't matter which foot I have forward, I'm doing the same things. I'm working red zone to red zone, and I'm getting energy from this hip, putting it in this hip, and that's the momentum to drive and attack straight. So what you see here in this position is as I drive from this foot, I'm casual and relaxed, I move energy here, and then as energy leaves this back foot, it's added to here, and I get a real strong position, and I get to push from it. This becomes almost like a post that I can put as much energy as possible through. And if you go and watch the short clip that I have in the stance video section about moving red zone to red zone, you see that when I get to this position right here, when I've shifted that weight, no matter how hard I push, the heel is never going to collapse and hit the ground based off of the position that my foot is in, which is calcaneal foot, knee over that red zone, and weight and pelvis over the foot. I can push as hard as I want when my pelvis gets over that spot, and I'm always going to get energy returned in the opposite direction. And that is what we're searching for. And we do that through our hip sockets. We want to learn that very effectively. So when you're in any stance, whether you're sprinting, doing any of those things, we want to be in a position right here where that shift happens. Notice every time I push off my back foot, my only reaction is forward because that's science. Science gives me an exact reasoning, Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And if I align my body in the correct space for me, and what that means is some kids will have a higher heel, some kids will have a lower heel based off Achilles tendon length, some can stand up and do it, some have to have a deeper knee bend because their Achilles is a different length. That can change. What does not change is the area of the foot and what the hips are doing from a large segment. So the hip is the larger, more proximal segment, more towards the middle of the body. The distal segment would be my foot. So this is what my knee and my foot are agreeing to, what my hip is doing. So that happens here. Boom, I could push as hard as I wanted. And if I really wanted to accelerate there, I'm just, and I'm out. And you never see me drop. You never see any of those things happen. You never see me get vertical because I'm not moving through my knees. I'm moving through my hips to create that movement. And we can teach anything to do that. So when you see corkscrew, we see corkscrew walk, we see DKE. These are the patterns that we're trying to create. These are the things that we're doing so that we get better at early acceleration and being explosive. And we can create that for any athlete, any body. So when you hear corkscrew, coil, hip sockets, DKE, these are the principles that we're looking for. Do we use the back hip to start to create momentum into our front hip? The motion that happens for us is a push, pull, push. And what I mean by that, and what we've discussed multiple times, is that the back foot is always a push position. It should never go straight back and push through the heel. As soon as I put pressure into my red zone, my only reaction is for the hip and knee to move forward and me to move forward. Now, in this position, this is boom, that's my push position. Before that happens, my whole body's doing oppositional things. So if this hip is externally rotated, as this back foot pushes, my hamstring has to be strong enough to pull me over here. My hamstring is what's holding me over the top here, and it's what pulls the pelvis forward. And so once that position is over, then I get to my push. Then the hamstring goes from a puller of the hip over to a driver of the hip, and the glutes take over. When hip extension happens, if you haven't watched that video, that's exactly what's happening here. So that is what we're trying to achieve when we're talking about moving through our hip sockets. That is what it looks like fundamentally. I'm push red to red, and I'm spinning around the hip socket, which means that I always finish heel out and on the pinky toe side of it. I'm on the pinky toe side because if I push big toe, your big toe has 90 degrees of extension. So I could get to right here, and I'm not going to push horizontal very well. I'm going to curve. I don't have the same amount of energy because my big toe is so mobile. But if I get on the bones of my fourth and fifth toe, boom, I'm so explosive because I get immediate energy return because I have no mobility to work through. It's straight to my glutes. And that's why we talk and use the red zone so much, because of the difference between moving through the big toe from a locomotion and explosive perspective as opposed to other things. The big toe is like your thumb. It gives you leverage and proprioception, but ultimately it is not what's going to create the most explosive position and potential for you in the small moments that we're looking for to just go. You don't have time like a sprinter. You have one move, and either you get everything you can out of it or you don't. So we want to be in optimal positions to do that. Moving through our hip sockets, understanding these things are going to give us that ability. And that's what all the drills are made for. DKEs, corkscrews, it's all about understanding and ingraining that pattern so that we can move horizontally.